Do you want to control magic? Do you want to fly? Do you want to see dragons and other magical creatures? Oh, it's a Dargan. Pretty much every civilization ever has had these thoughts somewhere in their folklore at every point in history, and you get to experience all of these and more in the action-adventure RPG and the newest installment in the Wizarding universe, Hogwarts Legacy. But is it worth that price tag? Well, that's the question we are going to answer today. Join me as we take an overview of the story, characters, combat, controversy, and more behind Hogwarts Legacy. No major spoilers in case you want to play it after. Too long didn't watch. Hogwarts Legacy is one of the best-selling video games right now, and it's for good reason. Let's speedrun a controversy. J.K. Rowling has made statements that make her look like a bit of a bigot in the transgender area. Let's boycott so she doesn't make money. But she most likely was paid for the royalties in advance, so your actual purchase doesn't affect her at all. She already got paid millions of dollars up front. And hey, what do you know, the boycott ended up being some good publicity telling people that the game existed by now. So what they go do, they went and bought the game. And if you're a proponent for the whole goblins are Jewish people debate, would you call it a debate? Would you call it a conspiracy theory? I don't even know. But if you draw the parallels like that, you also have to draw the parallel that one goblin having the radical ideology of eliminating every wizard on the planet because they feel the wizards are the source of all of his problems, you can kind of see where that conversation leads to, and that's like the opposite end of this argument. Do these controversies make the game more or less playable? No. And if either of those bother you that much that you are witch hunting people who are just trying to play a video game and enjoy their free time, I would advise seeking some therapy. There are phone numbers for that, websites for that, you can do it in person as well. That was a successful speedrun, I think. So Hogwarts Legacy takes place in the Wizarding universe roughly 100 years before the beginning of the Harry Potter series. You play the role of a new 5th-year student in the game, making you about 15 or 16 years old, depending on when your character's birthday would be. We're in the 1800s. Specifically, it appears to take place in the 1890 to 91 school year, according to a newspaper seen in trailers. The main focus of the storyline is you and ancient magic. You have a rare ability regarding ancient magic, and about half the main questline is learning about this ability. The other bits of the questline are you dealing with evil factions, mingling with other students, and of course, going to classes. Classes really don't take that long though, and you can skip the cutscenes anyway, so don't worry about that. One major question mark the game would raise is that none of these events are ever referenced in the Harry Potter series, and it didn't take place that long ago, so surely people would remember. But seeing as the game is just licensed material, it's not directly from the author J.K. Rowling, so pretty much everyone who cares about like the lore canon behind it would probably not consider it canon. But if you're not into that boring lore crap, this is an action-adventure RPG, giving you no shortage of either. Wandering through Hogwarts and the surrounding region is exactly the experience you fantasized about in your childhood. Exploring Hogwarts Castle is simply breathtaking and is exactly everything you want it to be. And there are loads of side activities and collectibles that will take you around the map to find them. You could definitely argue there are too many things to go about collecting, but part of that is trying to fill out the map, and the map is quite big. If you have a tendency to get lost in exploration, you will experience a lot of that in this game. During that exploration, you will be pulled into combat, which in the scope of a combat RPG is quite basic. You have the basic attack, which has a combo of 4 magical attacks, the 4th one doing the most damage. You have a dodge that allows you to avoid damage from enemies' attacks. You have specials, in this case being the different spells of the Wizarding world. Specials each have their own respective cooldowns when in combat. And you have that stand your ground, protect against an incoming attack that comes with the counterattack in the form of Stupefy, which will stun opponents. Quite basic combat systems you will see in plenty of action RPGs. The most complex thing about the combat is that to play the most optimal way possible, you'll have to decide between protecting and dodging appropriately, because only some attacks can be protected against while others have to be dodged. However, you can dodge every attack, so it kind of ends up just making more sense to spam dodge and not worry about it. So the combat system is not going to blow your socks off with its complexity, and even on the hardest difficulty, the entire game, bar a couple of fights, is quite easy, especially if you're used to action games. And 1 versus 1, you're probably going to win every single time, especially because of the knockback your beefier spells inflict. But you'll usually be in fights where you're outnumbered, and you can either take them head on for some challenge, or try to stealth your way through for a lower number of enemies at one time. And the stealth system is quite alright. You can use a spell to make yourself mostly transparent, and you can sneak up behind enemies to one-shot them, and you can upgrade upgrade your stealth such that it might become your preferred method of taking down some, usually harder enemies. But all in all, if you prefer super hardcore, in-depth combat systems, the game's combat will likely leave you disappointed. One thing in particular that would make someone say the combat is too easy is the mechanic where you are told when you're about to get hit. However, that mechanic and the limitations of the combat system make sense given the lore of the franchise and the game. The premonition mechanic makes sense to have because the attacks from other wizards are going to be quite fast, since you don't need to wind up most spells. Having so much strict enemy attack patterns really don't make too much sense to have in this game because your enemies in the game are mainly humans or human-like, so quick attacks meant to be catching you off guard is their best form of combat. And unless you want to bring a great sword to a wand fight, there really isn't much sense in them making other weapons, especially since the point of you being enrolled in Hogwarts is to learn magic. And if you're a particularly naughty student, you might end up learning naughty spells, which might naughtily kill your opponents with one hit. And it makes sense for this to exist in the game, because it exists in the Harry Potter universe. Now, being able to upgrade it so it can kill multiple enemies with one hit is a little more debatable, but you can explain basically anything in the game by its magic. You can't question magic, and magic definitely exists in this universe. And something else that exists in this universe are the non-player characters. We have Professor Fig, your mentor, who taught you the basics of magic and who you embark on your journey with. We have Professor Weasley, who is basically McGonagall from the book series, Transfiguration Professor and Deputy Headmistress. We have the Headmaster, Phineas Nigellus Black, who is quite unlikable. Basically everyone hates him, or at the very least he's usually rude to everyone. And of course you end up becoming friends with some of the students, including Sebastian Sallow, a Slytherin, Natsai Onai, a Gryffindor, and Poppy Sweeting, a Hufflepuff, as well as Ominous Gaunt, a good friend of Sebastian and his family. There are others, but these are the main living characters that are the most central to the story or subplots. And I say living because some of the main story characters are dead people, mainly professors inhabiting magical paintings from 400 years ago. And all of those are the good people in the story, but of course there are some bad ones. I've already mentioned the existence of evil factions, mainly being dark wizards, poachers, and goblins, and they all kind of work together to some degree. The majority of them are nameless NPCs, but of course they have their named leaders. The leader of the Ashwinders, the main dark wizards, is Victor Rookwood, who happens to be the ancestor of Augustus Rookwood, a future Death Eater. Then there are the poachers, who are basically just a division of the Ashwinders led by Theophilus Harlow, and the goblins, also referred to as the loyalists, who loyally follow the goblin leader Renrock, and they all kind of work together to get intel from you about ancient magic and try to gain access to it themselves. It is a bit more complicated than that, but more detail would lead to spoilers. And those are the basics of the game, but one of the most important aspects of gaming is how does it feel to play? And a big part of the feel of how good a game is comes down to the questing. You of course have the main quest and a few major side quest chains, with a bunch of smaller quests on the side. And most RPG quests will boil down to go here, kill this, go here, collect this, or talk to this person for me and tell me what they have to say. But from my perspective, the game did a great job in making the quest not feel as if they were that cut and dry. And how you do that is through good storytelling. The weaving in of Easter eggs and familiar-ish characters, the plot twists and twists of the subplots, is it keeping you engaged with the questing for the characters. It was only really once I was looking to complete 100% of all of the quests did I feel the fetchy nature of the RPG questing. But these were with the completely random side quests from like an NPC that you only see the one time, or from just something completely different from an NPC. But the main story and the major side stories called relationship quests have the captivation to them to not make them feel as if you're doing chores. And everything is quite good at introducing you to the concepts of the Wizarding universe and making you feel as if you're an important part of it. So the feel of general progression in the game doesn't get bothersome, and you actually do want to continue the storylines. But even though the questing of the game might feel good, another important aspect of the feel of a game are the bugs and performance issues. Starting with performance, from what I've seen around elsewhere, the performance on consoles is a bit stuttery here and there, particularly when flashier magic is involved. I personally can't say much about the console experience though, because I have been playing on PC. What I can say though is the consoles are not even close to being able to support 120 FPS on this game. That's because for the PC gamers out there, you really cannot overestimate your GPU on this game. Hardware Unboxed did a fantastic, massive breakdown of how 53 different graphics cards perform with the game, and unless you have the best of the best GPU-wise, you're gonna need to turn down some settings. In their testing for 4K Ultra without any upscaling, you need one of the new GPUs to get 60 FPS average. You need a 4080, 4090, 7900 XT, or 7900 XTX. Even the 4090 somewhat struggles with the game, as the 7900 XTX, a $600 cheaper graphics card, can beat it in several scenarios in this game. And if you want ray tracing with this game, just forget about it. The 4090 can barely hit 60 FPS average with ray tracing at 4K, and even at 1080p ray tracing, the 7900 XTX wins at a somewhat disappointing 89 FPS average. And from what I've seen around, Nvidia GPUs just don't seem to like this game. They have larger 1% FPS drops, and I've seen flashing and other weird graphics behavior from Nvidia, which I have not experienced at all myself on AMD. But I do have the 7900 XTX, so I've experienced very little hiccups when it comes to graphics rendering, but your results may vary, especially if you're running really old hardware. And I also haven't really experienced a ton of bugs like some others might be, though the more I have played, the more I have seen. But I probably went the first 25 hours or so not really seeing anything major. But in the other 20 hours, I've found a few small things and a few big things. Sometimes the premonition system, which again tells you when you're about to be hit, just kind of breaks and doesn't tell you anything. And it mainly tends to do this in bigger fights, kind of when you really need it the most. I've also had this one lady in Hogsmeade just not exist. And most recently at this one bandit camp, I was flung way into the air during combat, killing me instantly as I fell down. And it happened again when I went back there, so it was definitely repeatable. But those were the main issues I experienced, and all things considered, these are far from bugs that would completely put you off from wanting to play the game. And they were few and far between, and some of these smaller issues are quite unlikely to go noticed by the casual player. So again, from my perspective, the game was quite well polished and was quite refreshing to play. It's about as close as you could possibly imagine to the perfect Harry Potter video game. The main weakness of it is the lack of enemy variety and tactics, but again, I've already mentioned how the limitations of the combat make sense given the universe it's set in. And if you know anything about the universe, it was never going to be like a Monster Hunter-esque type game where you have just bunches of different creatures that you're gonna end up fighting, and even in those, they kind of just use the same type of coding for the same type of creatures. But overall, as an RPG, between the combat, story, and exploration, this is one of the best games that has come out recently. It's quite compelling, and that's why a lot of people have bought it. That being said, it's not likely you're going to sink thousands and thousands of hours into this game, unless maybe you want to be a speedrunner for it, but you can expect a good 25, 40, 100 hours in a playthrough, depending on how much of a completionist you want to be. And the game does have some replay value. There is one quest that will change depending on what your house is. Probably would have liked to see a few more, but there is one. Not sure if there's going to be DLC for the game, but if there is, then there's maybe potential for it there. All in all, the game is most probably at least an 8 out of 10, depending on who you ask. I'd probably give it a 9 myself. Thoroughly enjoyed my time playing. Could have been slightly better, but overall, I was very satisfied with my experience. That's going to do it for this video. I'm going to also be playing through Wild Hearts. If you want to see more content around Hogwarts Legacy and my playthrough, like the video, subscribe to the channel, let me know in the comments. But that'll be it from me. I have been Trevor, I go by TheMrTrails, and I will catch you guys next time.